Native code translation layer Android.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching laurieWIRED, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at how we can translate some Java code over to native code, and we'll do this by using the Java Native Interface, or JNI, as well as the NDK, or Native Development Kit. So this is really important if you're an Android developer and you're trying to implement some of your code within native code. There are some kind of nuances that you'll need to understand before you're able to do this. Or it's also really useful if you're a reverse engineer and you're trying to reverse some native code that's part of an application. I think that the best way you can understand how to reverse an application is to actually be able to write it yourself. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to open up Android Studio, and I have a little bit of an application that contains some native code already created. So all you're going to need to do is just create a new C++ application. Let me just go and show you how exactly you would do that. You can do File, New Project, and then you'll come over here and you'll select Native C++. And I'm using Java today for the programming language. And you can just use the default toolchain or whatever you prefer. But I have already created this, so let's just quickly get an overview of what this application is actually doing. So all we have, this is what you're going to get if you create a new C++ application from Android Studio. Basically, it's just setting the text to whatever is returned from a particular method. The only things that I have added here are these two methods, which we're going to be working on translating over to native code. So what right now, it will call this call retString method, which is then going to call this underlying retString method that takes an integer as a parameter, and then it's going to print that integer to the screen. So it's going to set this particular text view to the value returned by these methods. So let's just take a quick look and watch that run and see what it looks like. So I'm just going to hit my play button. My emulator is already running. And sure enough, here we go, printing 42 inside of Java. And what did we do? We passed the number 42 to this method. So exactly what we expected. Let me stop that. So that's really simple, doing this from Java code, but why don't we look at what that would look like to call this from native code, since we can't directly call this particular Java method. If you are wondering where this native code is actually implemented, we can see we have one declaration already that Android Studio gives you by default if you're making a native application. It's going to be this string from JNI method that's declared inside of our Java class right here. And it's going to be loaded via this system.load library call right here from a native library called this translate native method. And where is that going to be implemented? It's going to be over in our C++ folder. And then it's going to be inside of our native C++ code. So once this is compiled, it's going to be in the form of a native shared object or .so binary. And if you check this out, this is the name of the native method that was declared inside of our Java code. You see this string from JNI right here, plus actually the fully qualified class name in which this string from JNI method is actually declared in. So javacom example translate native method main activity corresponds to this package name plus this particular class name in which this method is declared in. Okay, so let's go over and actually create our own new native method and call that from this Java code. So I'm going to copy this method right here, since we can use pretty much the standard naming conventions. Why would you make your life difficult if you can just copy paste? So let's do a Control-C for copy. And let's make our own new one. And let's call this, let me see over here. We're going to call this call retString native, I think. So I like to do the naming convention of just whatever the method is doing, plus the word native so that we can differentiate here. Okay, let me fix the spacing here. I don't really like this much. I think this makes a lot more sense. Okay, so call ret string native, and we've declared that here, and this is going to return a string. So one thing to note here is that this is returning a J string or a Java string. If we're working in C++, the actual format of the strings is going to be different for a C++ string versus a Java string. So that's one of the big things that kind of trips you up if you're working in native code. You need to make sure that your types correspond to whichever language you're trying to work within. So I'll give you quite a few more examples of what that looks like as we work on translating some of this code. So let me go back over to my main activity, and let's actually declare this native method inside of our Java code, since right now we have defined it, but we've never actually called it. So let me copy this method name right here, and I'm going to follow the same format as here. This is how we declare a native method that's going to be defined in C++. Let me call this public native, and we're also returning a string from this method. So string is going to be our return value. Then we'll call this call ret string native. And that's a method, and there we go. And if you notice right here, this string declaration is going to be in the format of a Java string since we're working inside this main activity.java. So it's going to be the same thing as if we were in this C++ code declaring a J string right here. So those are going to be matching formats. Okay, so we have our method declaration. Our library is already getting loaded up here. So let's actually implement some of this code. First of all, to make sure our method is getting called, I'm actually going to take this call right here, and I'm going to put this inside of here so that it's called right there. So we're actually going to return the value that this native method is returning instead of this in our Java code. So now we have our call to our actual native method, and right now it's not really doing anything except returning this hello from C++. So why don't we have this call something else? I think that I'm going to pass in the integer right here, but we'll need to modify our function here and have this actually take in the integer instead. So let's do int, and then we'll call this num2print as well. So we need to change our native definition of this call ret string native method. We need to have that take in an integer as well. So that's going to take in, see, Android Studio is really nice. It'll tell you that it's expecting another integer. And remember, this is taking an integer from Java code, so it's going to be of type JInt. And so we need to do comma to pass another parameter, JInt. We'll just call this num2print as well. And there we go. So now our signatures are matching. All right, now we want to actually call this ret string method from our native method right here, since we aren't actually using this method currently. We're only calling our native method, which is still just returning this hello from C++. So let me get rid of this, and we'll want to remember to return a string. Okay, so let's do, I'll just put a comment here, call. What are we calling? We're calling this right here. Call this method. So you might think, let's just do that and add a return right here, get rid of that. But no, this isn't gonna work because this ret string method is only defined in our Java code. It's not defined over here in our native code. So right now our native code is saying, I don't know what this ret string method is. You don't tell me what it is, and I have no view into it. So this is where the Java native interface really comes into play. So the Java native interface, you can see, is actually a library that we're including into our native code via this hashtag include JNI.h, and this is going to include all of our JNI functions right here, and I like to use the Oracle Java documentation in order to see exactly what we're doing. So I go over to this JNI Functions. Basically what this is doing is it's importing a ton of different functions that I can use inside of my native code to be able to communicate back and forth between Java code and my C++ code. So this means that I can use this to call any of these methods right here, and those will let me manipulate some of the Java code that I'm trying to call from my native code. So for example, this find class here, define class, all of these are defined inside of the Java native interface, callable when I import this JNI.h. So if I'm trying to call this retString method, I actually need to use a Java native interface function to let me do that. So what I'm going to be using, let me see if I can find it, call. Okay, these are all of the different call methods that you have available inside of the JNI. So we actually need to match the call type to the target method that we're trying to call. What is the target method right now? The target method is this retString, which is going to return a string right here. So that means we want to actually call this object method, since it's returning a string. So we can't call, let me see. If this was, for example, returning a byte, so let's say byte, then we would call byte method right here. But we're actually returning a string, which if you're familiar with Java, it's going to be of type java-lang string, but it's actually an object type. So we're actually calling an object method. So all this corresponds to is what is the return value of that target method that we're trying to call. So let me copy that, and we'll use that inside of our native code. So this is the first step to being able to actually call this method from C++. Now the only thing is we actually need to use the pointer to the Java native interface to be able to locate where this method is actually callable from. Luckily, inside of our native code, we have this parameter right here, which is the pointer to the actual Java native interface structure that holds this call object method right here. So all we need to do is actually call this env variable, and then we'll be able to access that method. Let's do env, and then points to call object method. And so this is going to let us invoke that. So let me just, here we have it. It's messing up because I already wrote it. So let me rewrite this. Do this, call object method. All right, and so this is going to nicely show us the exact parameters that we need to be able to call this method. So what we have, we need our JObject and our JMethodID, and I'll get into what those are in just a second. So I'm going to call this retString obj, and then retString method ID, and I think that should be good. Okay, so now we have the parameters that we need in order to call this. However, we don't have this retString object defined or this retString method ID defined. And what these are doing is these are letting us locate exactly what class and what method we're trying to invoke. So we actually need an object that is pointing to where this retString is defined in. So it needs to be a handle to this main activity class right here that holds our method. So we go back over to our native code. We also need the method ID. So this is going to be basically helping us find the method based off of its signature. So let's say, let me fix this actually real quick. Let's say we had 2 of these methods. And one took an int as an argument, and then one took maybe a char as an argument. How would I know which method I needed to call just based off of the name? Well, I wouldn't, because you can actually overload these names and have 2 methods with the same name. So that's why I need to know what kind of arguments and what kind of return value this particular method is associated with, so that the Java native interface can know which one to invoke. Let me get rid of this, and let's see exactly how that works. So we want to have a particular object that this call object method is going to be called on. But let's put that aside for just a second and go over to this method ID so we can get the particular method that we're trying to call. So first of all, I'm going to do ret string method ID. And let's define that variable that we're going to pass there. So that equals, remember we need to use our pointer to our Java native interface to get all these pretty methods that we want to be able to call. So we'll do env, accessing that, and we want to be able to get the method ID. Okay, so here we go. So that's our Java native interface method that we're going to call, and that's going to require a few arguments. So first one, let me see if we need to reference that. We'll do get method ID. We can use the official documentation here to see exactly what we want to try and call. And you see this returns a J method ID. Okay, so we're already using the env as the pointer, so we do that right here. So we're good there. First thing is we need the class that the method is part of. We need the actual name of the method, and then we need that method's signature. So remember, that's the encoded, the sig right here is the encoded types of the parameters as well as the return value. So let's add these. Let me go to, first of all, we're going to need the ret string class. And we're going to need the name.
It's 6 o'clock.
Well, that was weird. Now we're going to need the name of the method, which was ret string. Then we need the actual signature of the method. So if we want to get the signature of this method, let me go over back to our official JNI documentation right here, and we'll go to the JNI types right here. So if we were trying to find the signature of a method, we can use this as an example. It's basically just going to encode all of the types and then encode the return value as well. So if we see here, we have the parameters are going to be one integer. So let's do that. So we're going to do in parentheses I, and let me show you here how that works. I is going to be for integer, so that's one of the parameters. Parameters go inside the parentheses inside of the signature. And then we want to do the return value. So the return value is of type string. So remember, that's an object type, since the Java string type is actually an object. So if we look at object, we need to actually have the fully qualified class name, and that's going to be put inside of this L and the semicolon, kind of like parameters, but like that's the opening parameter right here, and that's the closing parameter. So the fully qualified class name of the type goes in there. So we have an L and a semicolon, and what is the actual signature of this? we have actually nicely right here, they give us the whole signature that's going to be separated by slashes. But if you wanted to see as well, you could just do Android string class, go to developer.android.com, and this gives you the package and class name. So it's just Java lang string, but instead of being separated by dots, if we're looking here, we actually have to separate these by slashes. So we can do Java lang string, fix that. Okay, and so that's going to be our method name, and that's going to be our signature right here, taking an integer as a parameter and then returning a string value. All right, we're almost there. Let me quickly say this is JMethodID, since that's the type. So now we have one parameter done, but what is this ret string class right here? This is actually type J class, so Java class. And this is going to be the class that this method is declared in, which is going to be our main activity class right here. So what we need to do is let's do J class, ret string class equals, and we actually need to find the class, so we can call our Java native interface env, and we can do find class right here, and let's just pass in the class name of our target class. So this needs to be the fully qualified class name, so that's going to include our package name. It's going to be separated by slashes, remember. And then it's going to be the actual class name itself, which was main activity. So there we go, and we found our class. All right, so now we have what class this is declared in, put into our ret string class. So that's getting a handle to our main activity. And then we have the method ID of the method we want to call. That's going to be this ret string method, which we defined down here. So now we actually want to call that particular method. So if you notice, we kind of worked backwards here. I like doing that because it tells me which parameters I need to use. Because if you're using the Java native interface, it can get kind of confusing. So if you start by using the call object method or whatever call method you want to use, then it's kind of easier to figure out exactly which methods that you need to call all around. So last thing we need to fix is this ret string object. And this is actually the easiest part, thank goodness. So all we need to do is actually take this second parameter right here, this J object, and this is kind of equivalent to if you were over in your Java code here and you were trying to call this dot something. This is just referencing the particular class that you're in, if you're familiar with Java. And so it's passing this as a parameter to our native method, but this is also a keyword in C++, so we need to name it something else. So let's call it this obj. So this is going to be the handle to this main activity that is actually calling this particular native method right here. So we can just copy, and we'll just paste that in right here since I changed the name, which is fine. So now we're actually calling this ret string method, but if you remember, this ret string method took an integer as an argument. So what we need to do is we can just add an extra parameter to this call object method. So if we take a look at this method, we actually can pass the parameters that we want to pass to this ret string method that we're trying to call as arguments to this call object method. So now if we want to add extra parameters that is actually required for this ret string method, we can actually do that as secondary arguments to this call object method right here that's defined in our Java native interface. So we've selected the object, we've selected the particular method that we're trying to call, And then we can do comma, and we'll add the secondary parameters that are actually going to be passed to this ret string method right here. And we have this jint that we passed as an argument to this call ret string native over here from our Java code. Remember, we passed in the value 42. So let me call this, and we'll just use that one. So this is passing a jint or Java integer over to this ret string method. So that looks good. So now we have actually called this ret string method, and I know it was a lot, so great job if you made it this far. What we want to do now finally is actually return this value. So we're going to do return, and then that. There we go. So this is actually returning a J string. So in order to get the return value of this, we'll just typecast this to J string. And then it will actually return the value that we expect. So to prove that this is actually running something different, since I'm about to show you this application running now, let's pass something else. Let's pass in 36 maybe. And let's go over from the top exactly what we were doing. So we have over here in our Java code a native method that we imported, and then we declared a new call ret string native method that's actually defined in our C++ code. We're calling that from our call ret string Java method. So the Java call ret string will call ret string native underneath, passing it this value 36 as an argument. And if we come over to the native implementation of this, we have our call ret string native, which takes in our parameter to the Java native interface as a pointer, the current object for which this was actually called on, so it's going to be the main activity object, and then it passes in the number, the Java integer that we're wanting to pass to this ret string value. So then, if we want to actually call this ret string, which is declared in Java code, we actually have to get a handle to the class that it's declared in. So this is going to be a handle to this main activity class. And then we have to select which method we're trying to call from that class by passing the name of the method as well as the signature of the method that takes an integer as an argument and then returns a string. Then we're using the Java native interface to actually invoke that method that's declared in Java code and passing it this num to print as a parameter to that method. So here we go. Let's actually just go through and run it now and expect that this value 36 is going to successfully get printed to the screen, but all of that work is happening in native code. Let's just run it and see. Hope for the best. Fingers crossed. Perfect. So printing 36 inside of Java. So thanks so much for watching laurieWIRED, everyone. In this tutorial, we took a Java method and we looked how we could implement the same thing in native code. And we used the Java native interface as our bridge between Java code and native code so that we could actually select which Java method we were trying to call from our native C++ code. Since if we didn't actually use the JNI, the C++ code would say and complain that it didn't know what method we were trying to call. So thanks so much for watching laurieWIRED, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next video. Ooh. Okay. He wants onions. And then more mayo? He likes his mayo in order.